Hi everyone, welcome to our study of Beowulf. I've got to tell you, when I was much younger and had to read Beowulf in high school, I absolutely hated it. I just couldn't get past the fact that, it was old English and I was so not interested in that. And then in college, I made it through my first 4 years, my first degree, without having to read Beowulf again. So I thought I was successful at that point. Then in the master's program, Beowulf reared its ugly head. I've got to tell you, I'm really glad it did, because Beowulf is awesome. I don't know what it was about me. Maybe I think it was just that prejudice against the idea of old English stories. And, when you realize that Beowulf is a poem and it's written in book form, that's kind of confusing to somebody who is just starting to study English. So anyway, I hope that you will end up loving Beowulf as much as I do. Now I'm going to throw something out here for you that I normally wouldn't do. First of all, read Beowulf first, and we're going to take some time on this so that we can really get a good understanding of it. Then, in your free time, if you have a little extra free time, there is a movie called Beowulf and Grendel that features Gerard Butler as Beowulf. It is nothing like the book, okay? I mean, obviously it pulls from the book. You can't watch that instead of reading the book because it's not the same. However, watching that movie made me more interested in Beowulf. And I don't know, there was just something about that particular movie that brought the action to life, and it humanized things a little bit. Now, it leaves out the dragon, so you don't want to, like I said, you don't want to depend on that. Don't watch it instead of reading. Read first. Then, if you still don't like Beowulf, watch that movie. And then you'll be mad that they left out the good parts. Anyway, let's get started. Oh, before we get started too, I want to mention I'm sorry if this is a little dark. I'm recording in a hotel room. I'm at a conference for a few days this week. Also, if you hear any loud background noise, I literally think there's a party going on at the pool. It's nighttime, but oh well. Anyway, I wasn't invited. So I'm here recording slides and talking Beowulf. Let's talk a little bit about the history of Britain to get started. It was abandoned as a Roman client state, and the island's factional territories were open to Germanic invasion and Viking raids until literally they were conquered by the Normans, whose culture was this weird blend of Nordic aggression and French Christianity. So you can imagine that, those two things really worked kind of oddly together. Nordic aggression and French Christianity. Traditions of canonical and heretical Christianity were well established on the island when the Beowulf narrative became part of the Anglo-Saxon culture. Grammatically similar to Latin, Old English was preserved in spoken form by the Britons on the fringes of the realm when Anglo-Saxon written word was overwritten by William the Conqueror. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records many details of the raids, sieges, and conquest of this era. And this image is a detail from the Bayeux Tapestry from the 11th century, commissioned by Bishop Odo, showing Odo, half-brother to William the Great, cheering his troops forward. So let's talk a little bit about the background. We can date the manuscript of Beowulf to about the year 1000 AD, but the story of Beowulf is actually much older. So we can trace the story back to 1000 AD, but that story itself supposedly took place much earlier than that. And we seem to think that that's around the 6th century, so about 400 years of oral tradition passing the story along. The subject matter is not English. Beowulf is a member of the Geats who lived in the south of what is now known as Sweden, and he goes to Hrothgar, king of Danes. During this time, England was only beginning to be settled by Germanic tribes. So the Germanic tribes had started invading England around 450. Beowulf takes on a variety of roles within the Geats social system. He begins among the Geats with the T, as a strong fighter of marginal status as nephew of the king. He's adopted with great honor to Hrothgar's household and later becomes ruler of the Geats when his uncle dies without a male heir. The relationship of king and warrior is reciprocal, as the warrior provides service for the king, while the king, his lord, offers protection and distributes wealth, often within the form of armbands or neck torques or rings. Hero, as a great hall, becomes a place of communal gathering. It's their party spot, sort of like the pool at this hotel apparently tonight. Anyway, they gather for big feast and parties, and they make all these social bonds there. And they swear their oaths of loyalty at this communal gathering spot, and I just can't emphasize the importance of this hall. So when this hall comes under attack in the story, you can see it's a very big problem for these people. Okay, let's talk about weapons as heirlooms. We know that genealogy is important to the hierarchy of the Geats. Not the geeks with the K, but the Geats with the T. Anyway, so this is a photograph of a medieval sword. As Beowulf prepares for battle with Grendel's mother, Unferth lends him a rare and ancient sword, and he leaves his own weapon with the Dane. Beowulf discovers an ancient blade with rune markings in the place where he kills Grendel's mother, a sword from the days of the giants. Each of these swords is described as an heirloom, and the weapon is thus an instrument of warfare and a symbol of continuity. It's a symbol of continuity because it's passed down from one person to another. And so this idea of having something and giving it to someone else to keep it alive forever is something that is a general theme that you'll see developing throughout Beowulf. I'd like to talk for a minute about the elements of epic writing. First of all, there are several characteristics that are indicative of epics: length, historic or mythic content, motifs that are familiar. Also, divine intervention seems to come into play. There's always some act of heroism and heroic flaw, which makes it more interesting because we are people, right? And people have flaws. So calling out that heroic flaw in an epic is another sign that indicates a good epic. Also, orality and performance or writing. So most of these things begin as oral history or oral tradition, and perhaps they're performed, or at least they're told, like Beowulf is a song. So not the kind of song that you might hear on the radio or something like that today. Not something you buy from iTunes, but anyway, there's a performance of it, and then ultimately a writing. And also language that's important in the epic writing. Epics are long poems that narrate important historical or cosmic events using elevated language, a multitude of actions, and large casts of protagonists that are both human and divine or supernatural. There are invocations to the gods, long speeches, and repetition are prevalent characteristics in the epic. Hrothgar understands that Beowulf's ultimate allegiance must be to Hygelac and his homeland, yet the Geats and their leader have undervalued their greatest asset. Beowulf's threefold plan to serve a living legend and honor his own kinsman and attained legendary status himself is prideful, but it also demonstrates his growing wisdom by synthesizing multiple outcomes. Okay, let's talk a little about orality. The lines of no fixed length or meter in the original Anglo-Saxon are broken throughout into epic pronouncements or definitive phrases or clauses. Usually when we think of poems, if you're like I am, you think of something that rhymes. There once was a man from Nantucket, got a chicken and started to pluck it. Very much strong meter and strong rhyme, very definite rhyme. I'm not saying that it's strong as far as creativity there, but you know what I mean. Something very rhymey and very metery, for lack of a better term. But, as we're reading through Beowulf, you'll see that it doesn't seem very sing-songy, for sure, yet it still qualifies as an epic poem. Each caesura, while it may represent a singer's breath pause or tonal change, also suggests the space between ideas that demand declaration or some sort of change in this violent and contrary world that we're going to be reading about. A sophisticated mnemonic device for auditor and poet, as well as the key weapon in the battle singer's arsenal, is the repetition of consonants and sometimes assonants, the repetition of vowels. And this gives the poem much of its epic character and archaic feel, even in modern language. And you'll see some of that developing. Also, naming conventions. All names in the story are representative of character or nature. Like Beowulf means wolf of the bees or bear. The dragon is called Hordweird or guardian of the horde. And hero means heart. And hero is the large communal building that we're talking about that is literally the heart of the community and the heart of their feudal society. This image shows the text written by an Anglo-Saxon scribe of the Noel Codex, and you can see the Old English version here of what their language looked like. I say their language, we can read it. If you can read cursive, you can probably read some of this. One of my favorite parts about Beowulf are the characters and where they came from. So the characters clearly belong to this pre-Christian world where Weird, or Weird, W-Y-R-D, which means fate, governs the events that unfold. Like Dante and Milton, the Beowulf scribe never suggests that obsolete belief systems were fallacious for their adherents, but they became heretical upon revelation with the greater truth with a capital T. For example, the simple, almost human nature of Grendel's anger at his liminal status and Hero's noisy joy assumes the weight of divine retribution when the scribe claims the monster is one of Cain's clan. This clear ideological tension between old faith and new permeates through Beowulf. It's this really interesting blend of pagan versus Christian throughout. Pagan burial is represented in the opening lines when we see that a body is placed on a boat and set afire and pushed adrift. And, as I mentioned, Weird, W-Y-R-D, as you see there on your slide, means faith. And Cain is a reference to Christianity. So I've mentioned already that genealogy is important to this story and important at this time in this culture because you pass down things from one generation to another, to another, to another. But Beowulf is fatherless, which appears to have ostracized him from his own people. By serving Hrothgar, he perpetuates these past allegiances and honors his late father, and then elevates himself to adoptive son and heir to his uncle. It's through no fault of Hrothgar's sons, Beowulf's deeds displace them temporarily from their father's legacy, much as Beowulf actually was displaced from his own. So I mentioned early on that epics have the characteristic of divinity or supernatural in them. Beowulf is absolutely no exception here. So we have the superhuman Beowulf. So, in that way, he's our divinity, if you want to, divinity. He's not a god, but he's the hero here, so we're going to kind of compare him to a god. But we have the other side of supernatural. If we have good, to have a really interesting conflict, we also have to have evil. So we have three monsters in Beowulf. We have Grendel, Grendel's mother, and the dragon. Grendel is said to be one of Cain's clan, another biblical reference there, and is identified as an outcast from humanity in specifically biblical terms. Now, in a way, if you think about it, maybe Grendel has something in common with Beowulf, who was also an outcast from the Geats for being fatherless. So kind of keep that in mind as you read through. Grendel's mother is driven to avenge the death of her son, and that's considered appropriate according to Germanic tribal society. So have some different things going on here, different cultures at this time. And this is a medieval painting of a dragon that's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So that concludes this introduction to Beowulf. Hope this helps as you start reading it. Also, again, just want to reiterate, avoid watching any Beowulf movie until you read this, because there is not one that follows the book, okay, or the poem. There's not one that follows the poem. Also, if for some reason you don't have your book, and this is in Volume B, we've moved on to the second set of books. If you don't have this book yet for some reason, Google search Beowulf PDF, and I'm sure you'll find one. If you can't find one, please drop me an email and let me know.